The Westpenra Papers, The Second Level of Learning. First edition November 21, 2012 page. Exopolitics Paper Number 2, The Sirian Overlords by Westpenra, Monday, July 16, 2012. Revised, Tuesday, July 17, 2012, http://westpenry.com. 1. A review of the Sirius C theory. The reader who has previously read Level I knows that we spent a lot of time talking about the Sirian overlords in those papers, or the A.am.I, as they call themselves. We also discussed how their planet, which they call A.am.E, was thrown out of its orbit around Sirius C when the star was in the process of turning into a nova about 1 billion years ago, and later shrunk to become a white dwarf star, a state it remains in today. I learned this from Dr. A.R. Borden of Life Physics Group California, LPGC, but similar information can be found from other sources as well, one being some channeled material from the Sirians themselves, a faction which allegedly evolved into higher consciousness and eventually became the Sirian High Council. A website containing their channeled information can be viewed here: http://www.bibliotecapa.ciencia/ciencia_channelers16.htm. We have reasons to return to this group of non-physicals in a later paper. Just as a quick review, the story goes that the planet A.am.E catapulted into deep space in an accelerating speed shortly before the destruction of its home system, heading towards our own solar system. The inhabitants had to move underground in order to survive. Sirius C is located 8.7 light-years from Earth, so it took a while for the planet to reach the outer realms of our solar system. This huge planet, supposedly around 6 times bigger than Earth, having 11 satellites/moons, there may have been 12 moons at that time, or more, however, was then pulled in by the gravity from Neptune and changed direction, now moving towards the inner parts of our solar system. This put A.am.E on collision course with a planet which was then positioned between Mars and Jupiter and was called Maldek among many other names. However, A.am.E missed Maldek with a close call, but one of its moons hit Marduk and took a chunk of the planet with it. After have made the damage, A.am.E once again disappeared out in deep space and catapulted out of our solar system, now with course back towards Sirius and later turned around and back to us. Since then, A.am.E has allegedly been on a 3,600 years orbit around our Sun, as an extra, hidden planet of our solar system. According to Sitchin, LPGC, and the A.am.I people themselves, the next time the alien planet came back for a new visit, Maldek was hit once again and was now split in half. One half became the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, and the other half was thrown out of its orbit and placed itself between Mars and Venus and became Earth. Some say that our moon is actually one of the A.am.E satellites, which was pulled in by Earth's gravity. Scientists have now discovered that the moon is actually older than the solar system itself, according to former CIA remote viewer Ingo Swann in his book, Penetration, The Question of Extraterrestrial and Human Telepathy. So if the story about the A.am.E satellite is correct, it would explain the age of our moon. A whole paper about Mars and our own moon will be included in the Level 2 series, by the way. One problem with the Sitchin theory about Nibiru hitting Maldek is that he never even once mentioned that there was life on Maldek once upon a time. In his book it sounds like Maldek was a dead planet, and when Earth was created from the splitting of Maldek, it was not much more than a dead rock. This contradicts all the material out there, both channeled and other, that there was life on Maldek before the planet was destroyed. We are going to discuss this subject in the future, as well. LPGC claims that A.am.E and Sitchin's Nibiru, the 12th planet, are one and the same, and that it's the home planet of the A.am.I star race. I don't know where Sitchin got the name Nibiru from in regards to being the home of the Sirian star race, as it is not mentioned in any of the Sumerian tablets as being the home planet of the Annunaki, and I am bringing this up to be scrutinized some more at the end of this paper, but whether we want to name it Nibiru or A.am.E, I think there is truth to this theory, although it's been twisted so that we won't find out the whole story. For now, let's leave it with that. When I asked Dr. Borden, whom I will call AR from here on, because that is what he goes by, who it was that created the A.am.I and if he could tell me what is known about their early history, he told me that very little is known about it, and the A.am.I apparently haven't really told LPGC either, like it was something they prefer not to discuss. AR told me, however, that their founders could have been the so-called tall whites, who have an area in Nevada designated to them by our own government as part of an exchange program, or technology transfer program, TTP. Meaning that we allegedly get technology from them in exchange for that they get this location outside Nellis Air Force Base to use at their convenience. This is all detailed in Level I. AR further hinted at that the A.am.I started a war with their own creator gods, a war they eventually won. He couldn't say for sure whether these founders were the tall whites or not. The early history of the Sirian overlords, however, is told very convincingly by Robert Morning Sky, both in his Terra papers and other papers that preceded them. I find it very interesting that neither the A.am.I, Sitchin, nor LPGC have ever mentioned Orion nor the Mother Goddess in any of their material, and coherent research such as that of Morning Sky is not mentioned either. I am using Morning Sky as a reference to some extent here in my first papers for a reason. Although I far from agree with everything he has written or said, he is one of the few who has been able to find information that has been hidden from us, stuff other researchers have not been able to find, or have missed. Therefore, I am referring to the parts he wrote which corresponds closely to my own research and leave out the rest. The way Robert tells the story of the Sirians also corresponds pretty well with other reliable sources, such as the Pleiadians. Now, when I have looked at all this different material and compared them, I must say it's stunning to see how Sitchin must deliberately have left out very crucial information and added as he saw fit, like if he took notes from someone in the room, or as if he knew the real story already so that he knew exactly what to leave out and change in order to present a neuter, or perhaps even masculine universe where the divine feminine is totally absent and not even mentioned as a by the way. The Hopi legends and the story of the Star Elder, however, fortunately let us add quite a lot to the puzzle if we know where and how to look. So let's see if we can figure out how the Sirian race came about and how they evolved. 2. The early history of the Sirian people. Just like AR, I have no idea who seeded the planet, or planets, in the Sirius system, and I don't know who the founders were. I just know that normally, although there may be a certain group of founders who instigate the seeding process, many other founder groups usually, but not always, help out in the process. For the sake of our story, the answer to this question does not necessarily need to be answered, unless it would directly have to do with the founders' involvement in the history of planet Earth. I have not found any such important connection. What we do know, especially from Robert Morning Sky, both from his Terra papers and the earlier, Eden, Atlantis, and the UFO myth, is that the Sirians were seeded, and evolved much later than the Aryans. It's a significantly younger star race, but much older than mankind. In their basic biocont def, they are apparently a wolf/reptilian species, but also with cat-like features. Both females and males have golden brown, dark, or red manes, something we touched upon in passing in previous papers. Their ancestors, from whom this star race was genetically engineered, were wolf-cat-like creatures, which seem to have been a blend between a dog, wolf, a cat, and a reptile. This is where we get the name dog star for Sirius from, the word dog stemming from the Aryan word dakh pronounced similar to the German word Deutsch. According to Morning Sky's research, our ancestors were well aware of the origins of these star visitors and where they came from. This is how Robert Morning Sky describes them in details, based on the information he received from the Star Elder, but supposedly also from much older Hopi oral traditions. Primitive wolf and humanoid males had broad chests and with little or no waists, large and powerful buttocks with strong thighs and thick calves. Primitive wolf and females had large chests and a very slight feminine curve to their bodies. They had large hips and muscular legs. And although they had lost most of their thick and coarse body hair, they still retained a fine dark hair all over their torsos. Their arms were large and muscular, their wrists were thick, and their hands broad and rounded. Unlike the long fingers of the reptilian beings of Orion, the wolfen ones had shorter and fatter fingers. Their necks were also thick and quite short. The large broad heads of their primitive primate ancestors had become slightly more rounded, but their square lower jaws still gave them a very imposing appearance. They had broad noses with piercing hunter's eyes, a large forehead, and small ears. And perhaps the most dominating feature of all, hair. Lots of hair. The manes of their ancestors had given them coarse beards on the faces of the males and long sideburns with chin whiskers on the females. As wolfen women braided their hair, so too wolfen men braided their beards. Their hair and beards ranged in color from a golden brown to dark shades of auburn brown to a deep jet black. One race even had thick and long manes of deep red hair. When taken together, all of these features served to give the wolfen people the distinct resemblance with humanoid lions. Surprisingly, the Sirians, the way they have looked like for millions of years, are also described in Robert's work as short and sturdy, not as giants. This could be to their great advantage, however, as a shorter person, if strong and quick, can outdo a taller, less mobile individual. A typical example of this is the biblical story about David and Goliath. When I hear the Sirian overlords described in this fashion, it immediately makes me think of J.R.R. Tolkien's dwarves, especially how they are depicted in the film trilogy by Peter Jackson, The Lord of the Rings. Others, however, suggest that they look more like Diargo in Farscape, and that seems pretty plausible, because there you can also see the reptilian feature. I have had both Gimli and Diargo confirmed by two different sources as being very close to how the Sirian overlords look. We can sometimes get a hint of how they looked like in the Sumerian tablets as well, although the bodies they used here on Earth, and still do, are not really their original bodies, but were genetically manipulated and cloned to blend in better with the human societies of the time. Like author and researcher R.A. Boulay said in his excellent book, Flying Serpents and Dragons from 1990, in Sumerian times they seem to have showed themselves off as more majestic and larger in size than humans, just to emphasize their superiority, perhaps, and they kept their locked hair and long, braided beards. We can also see that their eyes are depicted as bigger than those of humans, with an odd shape, which is probably more similar to how their original eyes look like. We also see them depicted at times as extremely tall reptilians, dragons, even flying dragons, people with bird heads and human bodies, crocodile heads, hyena heads, wolf heads, and jackal heads, etc., all with humanoid torsos. Knowing what we know now about nano-travel and avatars, many of these beings are most certainly depicted in the shapes and forms in which they sometimes mocked themselves up in front of humans, either to intimidate or to show certain traits to create a specific impact on our ancestors. Today, however, the bodies these people use when mingling with us are very human-like. In fact, they are neither giants, nor dwarfs, but are such that we could pass them on the street and never notice, except if we look them deep in the eyes. If we do, we may get this strange feeling that the person's eyes have more of a cat or reptilian-like slit which bleeds through at times, while other times they are able to hide it. Morning Sky in his Eden, Atlantis, and the UFO myth goes on telling us that the sexual behavior of this star race was quite violent in the past. A dominant male had to prove himself before the female and defeat her in battle. If he couldn't, he was not worthy. If he could, they mated, often violently. A male could keep a harem if he wanted to. It proved his status if he showed that he was capable of keep as many females as he could possibly handle. This showed that he was a warrior and had managed to tame all these females after had defeated them in a one-to-one battle. In their society, it was very much the survival of the fittest and strongest. Males could also steal wives from each other, and if the original husband couldn't steal her back, the female was often pleased with her new husband because he was obviously of a stronger stock than her previous. It was all about survival in a very harsh environment. Although they eventually realized that body death is not the end of it, being defeated and killed was considered a weakness and something the soul brought with her into the next body. It was almost like this species was seeded to become a warrior race, which makes me suspect that their founders had this in mind, but perhaps had no idea what they had put into existence, or did they? It seems like this star race has kept almost all of these features into present time. In Morning Sky's work, the Sirian warrior race is described as quite barbaric, both in everyday life and in war. On the battlefield they eat their enemies, and if an enemy soldier is not quite dead, they are eaten alive. This sounds very macabre to us, but if we think about what we know regarding this star race from other sources, it shouldn't come as a surprise. In Sitchin's books, they are presented as a very promiscuous, incestuous, and barbaric race as well. To make sure that the bloodline of an enemy didn't continue past a certain point, they chopped off, or even bit off each other's private parts and threw them to the vultures, in the river, or they ate them. The Pleiadians say that, besides using us as their slave labor, the Sirians are also using us as their food source, both in physical and metaphysical terms. They eat us, literally, when they feel like it, but also eat our energy, which is our souls, by feeding off of our fears, terrors, anxiety, hate, and other lower vibrational emotions. In addition, they say, this star race also drink our blood, because the blood contains the elements of the soul as well. History has showed that all these traits are not exaggerations. Morning Sky adds to this by telling us that in dire times the Sirians even eat their young. In total contrast to the Aryan Empire, the Sirians, and what was to develop into the Syrian Empire, is male-dominated to the extreme. Curiously enough, the Syrian prince, Utuama, pronounced Shamash, whom I've been in contact with, told me, after I had presented this barbaric description of him and his star race in level I, that I was surprisingly correct when comes to describing the Syrians, so it seems we get confirmation directly from the horse's mouth. It may sound like I am trying to demonize this star race, which is not at all my intention. I still believe that there are those of the Syrian race, even amongst the group that visited Earth, who were, and are, friendlier around mankind. In other words, they are being more spiritually evolved than their brothers and sisters. Kudos to those, but they are mostly out of the scope of this series of papers, as they seem to have very little impact on how we are treated today, and my intention is to give the reader an as clear picture as possible of how this star race is affecting us in present time and what we can do about it. The evidence of their negative involvement in our evolution is no less than abundant, I even dare say, overwhelming. 3. The Sirians become a spacefaring species. All evidence points to that the Sirians have become a very technically advanced society, but still with a strict hierarchical structure, where different kings rule with an iron fist over the rest of the population. Bloodlines are extremely important for the Sirians, because a strong and pure bloodline means survival and power over others. Therefore, the royal bloodlines of the Sirians are considered the strongest, most ruthless, and most powerful of them all. This is one of the reasons why incest is practiced, but they also realize that if a family only produces offspring within their own bloodline, it is going to weaken them after a certain amount of generations, so on occasion, they also create offspring by marrying someone from another powerful bloodline, where both parties may benefit from such a relationship. Additionally, it only makes sense that the same souls incarnate over and over within the same family if they can stand the competition with other souls. In Sitchin's work, and even when talking to LPGC, very little is said about the A.am.I working class. All we hear about is the royal families and their spoiled, revengeful sons and daughter who use other worlds and innocent beings as playgrounds and toys for their war games and pumping of testosterone. When the working class is mentioned at all, they are presented as slave labor, just as ourselves, or soldiers who fight and die on the battlefield. Apparently, as a law for the upper class, a lord is not killing another lord, it is strictly forbidden and rarely happens, except, there are casualties in wars, where they accidentally kill each other, according to AR. Other than that, when comes to middle class and lower class, those rules don't apply. Of course, biting off each other's private parts is not murder, so no one thinks twice about that, even if it happens in a feud, lord against lord. Albeit, Kings have been overthrown and killed by their own sons or blood relatives, or by someone from a rival royal bloodline. This has happened both according to Sitchin and Morning Sky. King Al fled for his life when he was overthrown, for example, and in the Sirian society a king is also a lord, so it's hard to say where they put the boundaries. We've already covered that the Sirians are partly reptilians, and may even be the reptilians who people are discussing ever so often in books and on the internet. In all reptilian manner they have hierarchies based on the capabilities of each individual. The stronger and more ruthless dominates the weaker, etc., and this caste system is always a rule and not an exception. Democracy is far from a fair political system, and hearing the above, no one would say that the Sirian society is democratic. However, as AR reports in his essay, The Link, the A.am.I are now heading towards a more democratic system with a more humane society. I would say, I believe it when I see it, and so far there are no indications that this group of Sirians are heading towards something humane. AR, too, expresses his doubts, but tries to keep an open mind and stay hopeful, working on, as he says, trying to find a group within the A.am.I culture which is willing to support mankind's sovereignty as a biokind, and who support our evolution on our own terms. In the Sirian caste system, people either call each other by name, without a title, which is equivalent to a stranger talking to a stranger, or two people who don't like each other, or they call each other brothers if they are friends or are working towards a common goal. Utuama, King Nanner's son and King Anu's grandson, told me that the title Lord is something you earn when you have done something extraordinary to support the A.am.I society. I was surprised, however, when UTI said I couldn't call him Lord, because I am not a Lord myself. I had to call him Utu. A human, he said, can be dubbed Lord as well under the above circumstances. Like ourselves, the Sirians had it in their DNA to explore the stars, and to expand their domains. They built spaceships that could travel within their solar system and could even visit the other two stars in the Sirius system, because they were close, and explore and populate planets there as well. However, then they faced the same problem as all star races do on that level of development, and the question arose, how do we get to the stars? How can we travel long distance? This was a huge problem for the Sirians, who wanted to go out and conquer and show themselves off on the battlefield. They understood there must be life out there, on planets orbiting other suns farther away. So they became excellent engineers and their technologies and weapon industry developed in enormous speed. Still, they couldn't break the barrier, what was required to be able to leave the solar system. While their scientists worked on an answer, the Sirian kings worked on increasing the mining projects in their own solar system, something that went on for quite a while. Due to the gravity of the three suns, Sirius A, B, and C, worlds sometimes didn't last long in those solar systems and planets bumped into each other and got destroyed. The Sirians took advantage of this, because from once had been larger planets, the heavenly bodies that bumped into each other afterwards became smaller asteroids and planetoids which were easier to dig into and mine. Sometimes they used the resources of such worlds to the extreme and found the technology to hollow them out entirely. That's when they got the brilliant idea which was later going to get them to the stars. If they could hollow out asteroids that easily and only let a shell remain, they could also create a whole little worlds inside and use them as spaceships. But not only spaceships, they could also use them as deadly battleships. Finding this out made them very excited and they started implementing their ideas and equipped these worlds with their latest weaponry and tried it out in the solar systems. By inventing something which was later going to be called something similar to push and pull drives, they could maneuver these giant Death Stars, going against the solar currents, but also letting the hollowed-out asteroids glide on solar winds and cosmic currents so that they looked like any normal asteroid and could therefore not be detected if it wasn't known which one was a real asteroid and which one was a ship. This story is backed up in details by Robert Morning Sky in both his Terra papers, but more so, even, in his Eden, Atlantis, and the UFO myth. Over the years, when I've listened to the Pleiadians and read Marciniak's books, I've noticed that they, too, are giving hints to the same thing. Here, for example, is a quote from the book, Family of Light. Build your foundation with your physical form, and then you will begin to understand what is happening in the heavens, what the comets are, what the great energy waves embody, who builds and flies the spaceships, and from what line of time they jump. My emphasis. It is unclear exactly when the Sirians were starting their interstellar travels and how they found out how to do it, but one day, apparently, they discovered the so-called Einstein-Rosen bridges stargates, and how these sometimes led right onto a cosmic highway which finally could take them to the stars. With a few adjustments, one of them was to develop something like a fold drive, where they could travel across folded space to quickly get to another location in space. The Sirian star race was ready to reach the stars. They learned how to travel the galactic highways in their hollowed-out battleships, and they became a deadly force and extremely successful invaders. With time they became excellent travelers of the void. What they did was that they traveled together in huge armadas of hollowed-out asteroids across the star lanes and suddenly appeared in a solar system far away from their home in Sirius. Even if there was a fairly advanced star race living in that foreign system, with a tight security system, they would never think twice about a swarm of comets of asteroids coming into the solar system. It happens all the time in all star systems. So they were always taken by surprise when the Sirian deadly forces started using their highly murderous weapons that could wipe out whole civilizations before they even had time to get together and defend themselves. Who could defend themselves against solid heavenly bodies? The Sirians seldom took prisoners of war. The battles were usually an orgy in slaughtering, flesh-eating and blood-drinking, rape and torture. A new king, lower in rank than the Canis king, the major Sirian king of the home Sirius star system, was then put on the throne on the newly conquered world, and Sirians started migrating to the new planet, and so the empire grew with time. The Sirian overlords were extremely pleased to say that they had never lost a war, no star race had been able to resist them or defeat them. They started looking at themselves as the kings of the universe. Until the day when they reached the outskirts of the Orion Empire. 4. The Sirian overlords today. In the next paper we are going to see what happened when the Sirians and the Aryans met for the first time and what that violent encounter developed into. But to complete the overview on whom the Sirians are, and as a complement to what I wrote in Level I, let's say a few words about whom they are today. While the Aryans have evolved to become a spiritual empire, the Sirians have mainly built theirs on technology and never really cared too much about the spiritual part of existence. They are fully aware of that the universe is feminine in nature but are keeping that part secret. Since they started expanding their empire, they have now laid quite a few star systems under their jurisdiction and are still considered being a feared, violent race. They are, like I mentioned above, excellent pilots of the KHAA, and after billions or years, they are apparently still to a large degree using hollowed-out craft in their space fleet, although I'm sure they've found even more profound ways to travel between star systems in their asteroids. I also know that they are using other type of craft as well, at least when they are cruising our solar system. Some have described encounters with them where they have been using a big, black triangular mothership with 3 big lights underneath, one in each corner of the triangle. In the dark, it therefore looks like there are 3 smaller ships. Other shapes have been reported as well. However, there is much more to the story about UFOs in the sky than has been told to the public, and I will bring that up in a later paper. Since their first attempts to conquer space as a species anchored in 4% space/time with solid bodies like ours, they have evolved into becoming interdimensional beings who can also nano-travel. It is my qualified guess that the main reasons they have kept their hollowed-out craft technology is simply because they can hide in plain sight, and these solid ships are still excellent weapons. However, it is my full conviction that the major threat from them do not come from some kind of invasion where we fight in physical bodies in some huge battle of Armageddon. Albeit, this may be a part of it, the major threat is going to come from the nano world. 5. A closer look at Nibiru. Ever since Sitchin wrote about Nibiru being the home planet of what he called the Annunaki, there has been controversy regarding this planet. People are disputing the authenticity, and it doesn't seem to go away. Debates have gone back and forth what this 12th planet is, if anything. I believe there is no part or section of Sitchin's work that has been so much discussed and disputed as this alleged big planet in its 3,600 years orbit around our Sun, the planet which moons say to have split Maldek/Phaeton/Mulj/Marduk, the old planet between Mars and Jupiter, in two during at least two of its passages through our solar system and created the asteroid belt and planet Earth. I would say that the reason Nibiru is so controversy is because it's not mentioned in the Sumerian scriptures as the home planet of the A.am.I. Interesting as well, I have never seen the A.am.I mention anywhere that Nibiru is their home planet. They have never taken that word in their mouth from what I know of, at least it's not mentioned in public. They say they come from Sirius. What AR and LPGC call Nibiru, the incoming call A.am.E. Yes, they agree that this home planet is on a 3,600 years orbit around the solar system, but they never seem to take the word Nibiru in their mouths. Anton Parks says in his long appendix about Nibiru being the planet Venus, that he thinks Sitchin draws his conclusions that Nibiru is the Annunaki home planet from clay tablet VA 243. At the left side of the tablet, between the two figures standing up, there is a drawing looking like a sun in the middle, surrounded by what seems to be 11 planets or satellites. Parks says that this tablet is not an astronomical tablet, and the only inscription pertaining to it says, Duzpsiga, a personal name, Elialot, personal name, your servant. Dr. Michael Heiser, another Sitchin criticizer, is interpreting it to say pretty much the same. There is apparently no text or indication whatsoever that VA 243 is talking about the Annunaki gods. Parks tells us, translated from French into English. I would argue with this conclusion, because even if the tablet doesn't mention the Annunaki, the man on the seat is a giant, and even if it doesn't mention a sun and planets that are orbiting it, it looks pretty obvious to me that it is. In my wildest imagination I can't see that it could be anything else than that. However, the Sun with its 11 planets may not even relate to our solar system. Sitchin may have gotten that wrong, too. According to the Sirians and LPGC, A.am.E, the home planet of the A.am.I, has 11 satellites, moons, orbiting its planet. Can it be that what looks like a solar system on the VA243 tablet actually depicts A.am.E? And its 11 moons, and the depiction of the A.am.E system in the tablet is actually a way to tell the viewer that this tablet is discussing something pertaining to the A.am.I? The Sun in the middle could emphasize that this is indeed the home planet in the middle and the planets are in fact moons. It would be interesting to hear someone with knowledge in the Sumerian cuneiform debate that. Parks is also criticizing Sitchin, not only for connecting Nibiru with the home planet of the Annuna, but also for letting us know that its orbit around our Sun is 3,600 years. According to Parks, there are no such indications anywhere in the Sumerian scriptures. So where did Sitchin get this seemingly ludicrous idea from? Well, I stand by my belief that Sitchin knew what he was doing, he had a purpose with everything he wrote and discussed. I think he knew very well what of which he was writing was true and what was not. The critics who say that a planet spending most of its time in deep space can't host any intelligent life don't know anything about the Sirians and their technology. Evidence also points in the direction that major catastrophes can be traced back every 3,600 years, give or take, which would coincide with the passing of a big planetary object. Regarding Sitchin's credibility, I can count to 5 different options. 1. He started out with good intentions, but when the Sirian overlords and their earthbound faction found out about his project, they visited him and perhaps started out with suggesting that if he wrote his series of books their way, they would be bestsellers. If manipulating Sitchin didn't work, they may have threatened him into doing it. 2. Sitchin knew, from being in contact with the A.am.I, or from having access to tablets that were never made public, that there is more to the story than is described in the public tablets, similar to that there are tons of books that could have been part of the Bible were edited out and hidden from the public. After all, there are still a lot of tablets missing that they say they haven't found yet. Or have they? So, Sitchin used certain terms, like Nibiru, and gave them certain attributes he saw appropriate to enhance an agenda, knowing that very few scholars knew how to translate the cuneiform. He thought he was safe and that his story was so good that people prefer to believe it's true, even the parts that are not. 3. He channeled some of the material in his books, or someone Sitchin knew well, did. If so, it explains why some of his information seems to be accurate while other parts are not. The entities were not honest. 4. Sitchin was a pawn or a mind-controlled slave to the PTB and the A.am.I. Hence, he wrote his books in a compartmentalized state. 5. Sitchin was himself A.am.I, possessing a human body. If this was the case, the Sirian spirit, inhabiting the body, could write whatever he wanted, which would enhance future events that will fulfill prophecies. And better yet, this spirit very well knew the real story, because it was part of his own history. Sitchin died in October 2010, so no one can ask him anymore, but people tried, and he only answered questions he felt he wanted to answer and failed to address the rest. Sometimes he didn't even reply to other scholars' questions as of how he could come to certain conclusions, which Sitchin's son apparently said was because Sitchin didn't own a computer, he wrote everything by hand or used an old-fashioned typewriter. I don't know what is true or not in that case. However, if I had to choose one of the options, 1 to 5 above, I would say number 5 is the most plausible one, only because it answers most questions. This is just based on opinion and my own logic, so I could be wrong. However, I strongly believe that one of the options, or a mix of them, is true. What I do not think is that he was a genuine researcher and scholar who had the best interest of mankind in mind and that he did the best he could. Gary Zeitlin, who published Park's work in English, also emphasizes that there is no reference in the Sumerian tablets to that the Annunaki come from Nibiru. I repeat, there is none. If there were, the whole world could verify it, a thing which has definitely not been done up to the present. I insist, and I show this in my recent book. I am not asking anyone to believe words that I have received affirming this version is better than any other. On the contrary, I must insist that Mr. Sitchin doesn't seem to know the truth about the tablets that he pretends to analyze. Otherwise, he would long ago have given the references to those tablets that a rash handful have demanded of him for years. Nowhere is there any written allusion such as the Annunaki of Nibiru or the gods of Nibiru or they descended from Nibiru. GMSS. It needs to be noted, however, that instead of Nibiru, Parks and the Zeitlin couple state that the Annunaki come from Doku and the Pleiades, which is incorrect, probably due to his own mistranslation. Sitchin is using Nibiru consistently throughout his books as a key element in his story, and always refers it to the home planet of the gods. However, says Zeitlin and Parks, the few times the word Nibiru, is used, it seems to be pertaining to Jupiter or Mercury. Parks also says on a few other occasions that he thinks Nibiru is equivalent to Venus in the Sumerian scriptures, being the so-called Mulchtab, which was the moon of Maldek, the planet between Mars and Jupiter, who split in a million pieces in the far past. Another issue is gold. Sitchin claims that the Annunaki needed gold to rebuild the dying atmosphere of their home planet, while Parks claims there are no such claims in the tablets. Gold, however, and other substances, were used to enhance the longevity of the gods, something the A.am.I and LPGC have stated, as well as Morning Sky. All these contradictions seem to indicate that Sitchin simply knew more than he said, at least that's how I interpret it. Too much of Sitchin's translations are actually correct to dismiss him as a linguist. He knew what he was doing. Although, could some of it be guesswork on his part? Not in my opinion. The way he's telling the story, with warts and all, comes too close to fitting into the whole agenda of ancient prophecy, something we will learn in a later paper. In one way or the other, he was in alliance with the Sirians, there is little doubt in my mind. He knew they are here and he was in contact with them, is my conclusion. It is doubtful that the A.am.I need gold to rebuild their atmosphere for reasons we will soon go into, but it could be something they used as disinformation so that we feel empathy for them and understand why they had to come here and dig for gold and other minerals. They want us to believe that it was for survival purposes. Parks and Zeitlin make a few other comparisons between Parks' translations and those of Sitchin's, but I think I made their points here, and if the reader wants to know more, please visit the site of the Zeitlin couple here, http://www.zeitlin.net/endenchantment/anibheru.html. I think it makes perfect sense that the A.A.M.I use hollowed out planets as battleships, or Death Stars, like the one we saw in Star Wars. They also work as temporary homes when they leave their current home star system in Sirius. Interestingly enough, I read an article some time ago from the Daily Galaxy, which is a bona fide astronomy newsletter, with the title, "Spaceships as Death Stars?" Leading space travel physicists say yes. So it looks like they are already now starting to prepare us for what is to come. Scientifically speaking, it's not at all impossible for the Sirians to have a planet in a 3,600 years orbit around our Sun. If they want to call it Nibiru, A.A.M.E, Planet X, or something else, it's up to them. After have researched it, and also taken part of LPGCS research, I have no doubts that a Planet X is entering the solar system, coming in from the south. It is a red planet, followed by 11 satellites/moons, and it has been spotted by NASA at least since 1982, when it was all over the news. I think there is enough evidence that this is the case. And by the way, here is some more. http://battleoferth.wordpress.com/2011/06/03/nibiru-planet-x-20122-proof-of-government-conspiracy http://battleoferth.wordpress.com/2011/02/17/scientists-telescope-massive-hidden-object-in-space http://battleoferth.wordpress.com/2010/04/170/-link-extraterrestrials-near-earth-space-the-ground. The next paper is going to discuss the galactic wars where both the Sirian overlords and the Aryans were involved. But the story takes an interesting turn, because at one point the Sirians and the Aryans fought side by side.